and I'm very excited about this topic. Usually I present about more technical stuff. Today it's going to be like something very high level, which is because I have a question, and we have a lot of clients saying, okay, we have data everywhere, we have licenses everywhere, and now we need to consolidate. We need to check if we can consolidate in order to save on license costs and maybe additional costs. So I decided to create this presentation because it's not the usual consolidation topic. I'm going to discuss additional things that we can do in order to cut costs. So are you ready? By the way, that was my picture. The picture before was me after consolidating. So I was smiling. So we're going to talk about your potential architecture. We're going to talk about what are the benefits and drawbacks of consolidation. I'm going to talk about consolidation options, and I'm going to talk about consolidation options that are like the usual consolidation, the typical ones that when we talk about consolidation, this is what you think about. And I'm also going to talk about additional things that we can do that are also related to consolidation. I'm going to try and compare between the solutions as much as I can. Sometimes it's difficult to compare. We're going to try and do that. I'm going to talk about, sometimes you have in mind, you have a plan to consolidate, but you don't actually know where to start. So I'm going to give some tips about where to start. I'm going to give some information about some helpful tools. And now with the industry, tools are being created by the big cloud providers and by third party like crazy. So maybe I'm missing some of those. I'm going to talk about the ones that I know about, and I'm always happy to hear comments about additional tips. So let's talk about your current architecture. And by the way, I did not ask who is the audience. I'm assuming that you have some database experience. So if at the end of the presentation you have any questions, you can ask, or you can just unmute yourself and ask me on the fly, because I like the interactive. It's like we're seeing each other. It's very hard to work from home all the time and not see people. For me, especially. Otherwise, you can mute yourself. Okay. So let's talk about your current potential architecture. So let's say you may have one server or two servers, then this presentation may not be for you. This is mainly for cases where you have a lot of database servers or databases around, okay? So what's around? It could be different data centers, okay? It can be, for example, if we're in Canada, we have a data center in Canada, or a few data centers in Canada, or Canada in the US, Canada and somewhere else. Could be scattered around the world, because we want to be able, first of all, maybe we have users around the world, maybe we have applications, maybe we want to keep our data in different places just in case for disaster recovery or for availability. The data could be related either locally or remotely. So maybe we are using linked servers to query data from a different database in a different region, maybe local, maybe just the same region but different instance. So the data could be related. So what are we doing? How do we know what's the relationship between the data? Because when we're consolidating, all of those things are very important to understand the dependency of the data. And to complicate things even further, we may have different editions. We have Enterprise Edition, maybe with a lot of databases. Maybe we have Standard Edition. It's just, so it doesn't mean if we have Standard Edition, we could still have a lot of databases. So it's just to show that we may have different sizes, different editions. And to complicate even further, hopefully you don't have SQL Server 2005 anymore, but you may have different versions of SQL Server. And SQL Server 2020 is just a bad joke about COVID, so I decided to put the 2020 when I was writing the versions. I saw 2019, maybe let's just introduce a joke about 2020. So you may have different versions, different edition, different service packs, different cumulative updates. So it could be a big mess of things that we have there. Also, it's possible that you have a physical environment or a virtual environment or a mix. You may have a mix also of environments in the cloud, for example, virtual machines in the cloud, or you can just have databases in the cloud. And when I'm saying cloud, it could be multiple clouds, even to complicate further. So you may have Amazon, Google, Azure. And let's complicate even more, because I like this word. You may have installation of SQL Server instance, more than one instance on either server. So we have a big inventory potentially. So I love this slide from Microsoft to show that SQL Server can basically reside anywhere. So if you look down there, you can see that you have SQL Server on-prem, so it's a very high maintenance. You have to maintain your hardware. You have to have a team to administer everything. Every time you need to scale out, you need to purchase the hardware, configure the hardware. And then you have, on top of this, you may have a virtual environment, which is maybe a little bit easier to manage. And then on top of that, you have probably VMs in the cloud where you don't have to take care of the infrastructure, but you have to take care of everything else on top of it, from the operating system configuration and up to the databases and applications. And you may have the PaaS solution, which is database in the cloud. You don't have to manage the instance itself, just the database. And on top of that, you may have something that is not database related, which is a software as a service. So SQL Server can reside anywhere. What can we do? Okay, and all of this may be costly. So how do we reduce the prices of everything? How do we decide what's the best architecture for our organization? And let's talk about additional things that we need to remember is what are the network configurations that we already have? Do we have any network constraints? Okay, if we're talking about hybrid environment where we have, let's say, on-prem or maybe different data centers, or we have network, we have to configure network to the cloud from on-prem. What is the network that we need? Also, very important thing is to discuss security, okay? Because sometimes you have systems that have to be isolated because of security. So maybe they cannot be consolidated. Or you may have legacy systems where it's a client-server application and the client has to reside with a database, and you don't have support if it's not. So what are we doing with those environments? We cannot actually consolidate those type of instances, right, outside of this environment. Or if we consolidate, the instance has, or the database has to go with the application itself. Maybe you have vendors that are not going to support your environment if you're going to consolidate with others, right? Because sometimes you have third-party tools, and in the contract, they tell you our instance and database have to reside, or databases have to reside separately, otherwise you do not get support. And this is understandable, right? Because if you have performance issues, it's going to be a blaming game between different vendors or internal team and different vendors. So the vendor would like to make sure that their database is totally isolated from the rest. And what if you have a really legacy system where the developers are not even there, so you have no one to ask for advice? Maybe you need to, if you move something and you don't know how to change connection strings, you cannot move, right? So we need to take into consideration everything. So this is a lot of things to think about, and I'm probably missing additional things that you may have in your environment, but those, for me, those are the main constraints for consolidation. So let's talk about the benefits and the drawbacks of consolidation. So there are probably more than that, but the main ones, in my opinion, are that if you consolidate, you have less environments to manage because you're consolidating. You may be able to lower the license costs on the operating system and SQL Server, depending what type of consolidation you're doing. You may potentially lower hardware costs if you're consolidating. Not necessarily. We don't know what type of consolidation we're going to have. You may require to upgrade the versions of either the operating system or the SQL Server instance if you're consolidating, right? Because let's say that you're moving from a very old version of SQL Server to a newer one, you will have to make some changes. Potentially, you need to find out if it's even possible. But it's so this one, if you can see, this one is a benefit, but also a drawback. Why? Is it possible to do it? And sometimes when you're consolidating, you need to upgrade. It's a good thing for you, right? Because maybe you neglected something. You neglected an application that needed to move from, let's say, SQL Server 2008 R2 that is no longer supported to something newer. So it's a benefit, but also a drawback because you don't know if something will break. And potentially lower human resources, resource costs. And as you can see, this one can be a benefit. If you are part of the team that needs to go because you consolidated or moved things to the cloud, then it's a drawback for you. Otherwise, it may be a benefit for the organization if you can lower the cost of the personnel. And let's talk about another drawback. So if you're consolidating environment, you may have performance issues after consolidating, because systems are going to be consolidated and going to compete on resources. And it may be even higher maintenance effort because you will need to put in place some governance and monitoring on the consolidated environment to ensure that one system is not affecting the other. Another drawback is that you will have a more complex security setup. So if right now you have an instance that is totally separated from others, you don't have to worry about the security. And probably the vendor would, if it's a vendor, would ask you to get sysadmin permissions because they can, because it's their environment. But when you consolidate them to another environment, they can no longer have the same type of permission. So it's more headache for you and for them. And also the consolidation effort itself may be very high. Okay, so maybe you need to think about, okay, now we're going to consolidate. It's going to cost us a lot of effort and resources to consolidate, but let's see what happens in the long term, the long run. Is it going to cut costs? How many years? In how many years? So those are, for me, the main ones. Please feel free to send me any comment if you feel that I missed anything. And let's move forward. So let's talk about the consolidation options. So I split this presentation into two. So the conventional ones. So when we're talking about consolidation, what are we talking about? What are we thinking? So virtualization. So let's say that you have your environment is virtualized and you have we have few hosts. Each one is hosting few VMs. So it's very easy. If you have enough resources on one physical server, you can just consolidate VMs into one physical server. You have to make sure that you have the proper resource allocation for each one of the VMs. You don't want them to fight between them. This is a good scenario when you know, for example, that physical server A and physical server C that are hosting VMs are almost not utilized, and there is capacity on server B. So you can consolidate the VMs into server B, and then you can just use the hardware of the hosts for something else. This is the first one. The second type of consolidation, conventional one, is, let's say that you have multiple servers and each server has a SQL Server instance. So you may, for example, have maybe a stronger server depending on what you have. Sometimes it could be the same server if you have capacity, and really depending on what your instances are doing. So you can just move the instances to one server. So you have one physical or virtual machine with multiple SQL Server instances on them. And this is also a good thing when, let's say, if this physical or virtual server is a cluster, you can basically move instances and make them cluster, like the FCI, the failover cluster, the regular one, and you can split the instances across the nodes, right? So you have capacity and you also have failover. The next one is, let's say that you have two instances with multiple databases, and you know that, let's assume that those instances are on a separate server, and you know that the databases are not very active. You can just move the databases from one to the other, and then you can just get rid of that server or instance. And this one is what you're doing is that you have to make sure that the databases are not going to compete on the instance resources inside, and also security. From security perspective, you can do this. And the last one is, let's say that you have an application with the same exact schema, and you have multiple. So it's single tenant database. So each client of yours, for example, has a separate database, but the schema is the same for all those databases. So what happens? Let's say that you started with 5 clients and now you have 20,000 clients. So you have to maintain 20,000 databases. So in some cases, you would want to consolidate, maybe not everything. Maybe you want to just consolidate few databases into one so that you have less maintenance. However, you have to probably make some application changes. You want to know each piece of data, where it's coming from, which client it belongs to, but you have less databases, less to maintain. However, you may have more data, so you may have more performance issues. So it really depends on what you're doing and what is the activity that you have in those databases. So I will talk about some case studies at the end of the presentation. One of them is related to this solution. So these are the conventional one. Let's talk about more exciting options. So when we're talking about consolidation, for me, consolidation is not only consolidation, is way to make sure that you're saving. So it's either you're saving on resources, or you're saving on human resources, or you're saving on licenses. Anything that you can save, anything that you can reduce maintenance, for me, it's related to consolidation. So the first thing that we can do, let's talk about, so I'm just going to talk about the concepts, and then I'm going to build up the presentation around those options. So one of the options is to actually move to the cloud, to a database in the cloud. So Azure database or RDS database on Amazon, or Cloud SQL now on Google. And that means that you have a separate entity, just a database in the cloud. It cannot be related to any other database from the database. So if you think about an instance right now, you may have multiple databases, and you may be able, the application may be able to do joins between the two databases, Or if you have link server, you can actually join data between two instances. I don't recommend doing this, but in some cases you do that, and you may not have a choice doing that. So when we talk about the database in the cloud, the database is an entity, a separate entity that cannot be, you cannot query another data from another database in that sense. But for some application, that could be the best way to implement, because the vendor, the cloud vendor, is the one responsible for the hardware and the operating system and maintenance and patching and everything, and you're just in charge of your database. You just need to make sure that you've chosen the right level, the right resources for your database, and that's it. Everything else is taken care of by the cloud vendor. So what happens when you have a database in the cloud? Let's say that you decide, okay, now I'm going to, let's talk about Azure. So we're going to choose this type of machine for my database, or this type of how many resources or DTUs or vCPUs I have for my database. But what happens, for example, why would I pay if I'm not using this database on a regular basis? Okay, why would I pay for all those resources? Let's say that you have a lot of data, and maybe twice a day you're having like you're doing like a big query, but otherwise the activity is very low. So why would I pay for all those resources? So for example, on Azure, you have what it's called Elastic Pool, where you can gather few databases and under a pool. So the resources that you have are assigned to a pool, and then you just you move databases into that pool, and they share resources. So that's good when, in the case where I said before, where the activity is usually low, and then when you have one database working, the other ones usually are not working as hard, and vice versa. So it's good when you can spread the load in the databases, and you're going to pay a little bit less because the resources are assigned to the entire group of databases. And again, on Azure, so you have the basic, the standard, the premium, and you decide which one you're using. And it's very easy to move a database inside or outside a pool without downtime. That's a way to consolidate. Let's talk about the Azure managed instance. So this is like it's like a PaaS solution. It's like a Azure database, but it's actually an instance. So from your perspective, it looks like an instance. You have multiple databases under the managed instance. The databases can talk to each other, so you can query with the three-part name, with the database name. You can still query. It's, let's say, I don't know, it's not 100% like an instance, but it's probably 90% like an instance. If you go to Microsoft documentation, or if you're already using this, it's almost one-to-one with SQL Server instance, but not really, because there are a lot of constraints. For example, you cannot have more than 100 databases in a managed instance, and depending on the region, Azure region that you're using, it may be even less. You have some constraints around the size of the databases or the instance. So there are a few things that you need to look at, and it's also true when we're talking about Azure database or RDS. You need to verify that your environment is feasible for you to move to that type of environment. For example, I did a project for a client. They have 20 terabytes data, one database. So they wanted to go to and use managed instance, and when I was looking at the documentation, I realized that it's not feasible because you cannot have a database that size under a managed instance. Just an example. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Just making sure I'm not talking to myself.
No, sure.
Because I cannot see you. Okay. So Azure Managed Instance, the beauty of this is, again, you don't have to manage any hardware. You don't have to manage the operating system. Microsoft is patching this for you. You have availability groups. You have specific SLAs. You can have your own HANDR. So everything is managed for you. It's less maintenance and less headaches. Okay. What else do we have? So contained and partially contained database. Contained database is like an Azure database or RDS. It's like a database that is a separate entity under the instance. So when you have a SQL Server instance, you have the logins, right? You have to assign a login to a database user. There's a lot of codependency between the instance and the database. So contained database means that it's totally isolated, and you can just move the entire database from one instance to the other, and all the security, everything is inside the database. So it's not the best security, but it means that the database is just a unit and you can just move. But again, the drawbacks is that there will be some things that will not work. So if you're using, for example, replication or CDC or change tracking or numbered procedures, these features are not going to work. I haven't seen a lot of clients that are using numbered procedures, but the rest, yes. So, but you can always switch from replication to something else, right? So when we consolidate or when we move to a different strategy or architecture, we need to sometimes replace one feature with the other, or one way to do things with another. And we have SQL Server on containers. So now with all the buzz around containers, we can install SQL Server on containers. So don't believe everything that the documentation tells you. Okay, there are a lot of things to think about when you're moving to an environment like this. So until you test, you don't know what they are, because on paper everything looks very good. I'm not talking about this only related to containers. So you need to make sure that you're configuring everything properly and based on your specific environment. But let's talk about containers. So there's very similar to virtual machines, but without the operating system. So if you look at the diagram here, the drawing here, you will see on the left we have the virtual machine where you have the infrastructure. Then on top you have the operating system, then you have the hypervisor, and on top of that you have the guest OS that is hosting the SQL Server instance. When we're talking about containers, you have the infrastructure, you have the operating system, then you have the Docker engine, and you don't need any guest OS. So you're actually having the SQL Server installed right there. Okay, so it can still be created on VM, okay, and even on a shared VM. It can be a drive for VM consolidation as well, right? You can mix between VM and containers, or you can just use containers directly on a physical machine, and it's applicable for legacy and the cloud. So you just install the binaries, and you have a SQL Server in there, and it's available for Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. So if you're a Linux lover or a Mac OS lover, you can do that and implement SQL Server this way. And it works both on Azure and on AWS. Okay, containers. And we do have what's called SQL Server SQL database serverless. So imagine, I said at the beginning of this section, I said, okay, you have Azure database. Why would you pay for what you're like a database and environment? Let's say that you need for, let's say for every night you have some job that requires X amount of vCPUs. So you can create an Azure database with that amount of vCPUs. But why would you pay for the rest of the day where nothing is running or less activity? So Microsoft has now the serverless, where you pay by the usage. So you don't have to actually say what are the resources, you just pay by the usage. So you don't have to manage the size of the VM. There are a few things that you cannot do with serverless, but just read the documentation, because all the cloud providers are now, it's like, you have to be up to date all the time, because every day they're coming up with something new. Okay. So it's a cost effective, it's good for some of your implementations probably. It's a PaaS solution as well. Let's move forward. So if you actually like Linux, there's SQL Server on Linux as well, right? So what are the benefits? So the performance, the TPCH benchmark show that because Windows is a little bit heavier, or a lot heavier than Linux. So when you install SQL Server on Linux, it's going to be faster. It is, from SQL Server perspective, it's identical to SQL Server. It has the same features, not from the operating system, but if you're a Linux person, maybe you will find it much better. From price perspective, you don't have Windows licenses, so you can cut costs there. And Usually when you choose Linux, you would choose one of the open source databases, but from what I heard, because I haven't played with all of them, SQL Server has a lot of features that the open source, other open source databases, they don't have or don't have yet. So, and even if you have SQL Server already, and you just would like to have a lighter environment, or you have you like to manage the Linux better, then you can use this route. And there's another thing that that you can do. So again, like I'm saying, consolidation, it's not only putting all the data all together. There are additional options to place data in a better way or in a cheaper way. So one of the projects that I'm doing, and Christiana, I know that you know what I'm talking about. So let's say that you have you need to archive data. Let's say that you have a very large databases and you need to archive data. Most of the organizations, or many of the organizations, need to keep historical data, which is mostly read-only, for 7 years, let's say, but they need to keep, let's say, a year or few months of the live data. So you do have additional ways to keep historical data read-only somewhere, either on-prem or in the cloud, to be accessible for you. So when you need to access it, it's going to be slower to access the data, but you can still access, or it will be faster. It could be faster. So here's an example. You have the data lakes. It's just additional ideas to consolidation or cutting costs. You can place your historical data in on Amazon. It's going to be in S3 buckets. In Azure, it's going to be in the data lake blob storage generation 3. And you can keep them in different formats: CSV, JSON, Parquet, which is even more compressed. And for example, if you decide to keep the data, you can partition the data on those storages for better queries. And if you have that, then after that, you can still query the data from SQL Server. So for example, you can use external tables with the Polybase to query the files, and it's from SQL Server perspective, it will be seamless because you're going to query the data through views. So you have an external table, you have a view, and with the Polybase, you can actually query this data. So it, like I said, it may not be as performant, but it's still there. So the reason the reason behind it is that the cost of keeping this data where we keep it, it's very cheap. Okay. Now this is not a good solution if you update the data. Okay. This is a good solution for read-only. Another, yes?
Sorry, Michelle, I have a question here. For example,
Yes.
when we're working in Azure Data Lakes blob storages, then we learn something called, cold storage and hot storage. I think that's the same things you're referring here, right?
Exactly. Yes. So what I'm saying is that this is just an idea. You may have additional ideas not only on the cloud for cold storage. I've seen implementation where, for example, you can keep different databases on cheaper storage with I don't know, with a cheaper SQL Server instance just for reads. So this is, for example, a project that I did for a client. They got rid of the application with SQL Server, but they needed, they bought a new application, but they needed the data from the old database to just stay there for queries. So they were saying, okay, let's move it to MySQL because we will not have to pay for the database. But then they realized that migrating from SQL Server to MySQL is going to cost them too much. So we just found them a solution to keep it on, let's say, even SQL Express. So they can still query, and the storage can be like anything. Like today, my laptop, like today you can actually create a SQL Server instance on my laptop, which is what, $300, and just have it just in case. Okay, so this is just an example, but you're right. So if you put it in the cloud, it's going to be a cheap solution. You're only going to pay if when you query the database, the data, right? You can use link servers also to AWS Athena or Azure Synapse, and you can actually map those files or use those files with Athena, with Spark, with Azure Synapse later on if you need to analyze the data. So you're using the cold storage, but you can also later on use this data for analysis or analytics. So just things to think about.
Thank you.
So let's try to compare between the solutions. So this is very hard. So I try to cover all the solutions, but again, they're coming from my brain only. So if you have any additional ideas, I'm always happy to share and to learn as well. Things that you've done for consolidation, or keeping cold and hot storage. I would really like to learn additional things. It's just my goal is to try and open our eyes to additional things that we can do to lower the costs that we're paying right now for keeping data or using data. So why I put apples and oranges? It's because it's very hard to compare. So here's an example. Okay, so I have a big table here. It's very hard to read, but let's even take like one of them. Security. Okay, let's start with the third line, security. So when you virtualize, okay, you have isolated machines, right? You have a virtual machine with probably one SQL Server. So you have one physical host and you have different VMs, and each VM is totally separate from security perspective, if this is what you want. If you consolidate few instances on the same OS, the instance itself is isolated, but they're sharing the same OS. So you need to take care. So for example, if somebody has access to XP-CMD shell to do operating system stuff or PowerShell, you need to make sure that you define your security very, very properly for those few instances that are consolidated into the same machine. For example, if let's take the last one, the database consolidation. So you're consolidating databases into the same instance. You have to, again, now you have two problems. On the operating system side, the security, and also in the instance itself. So who has permissions to do what? You can no longer give sysadmin or DBO maybe. So you see, so this is, it really depends on your environment and what you're consolidating. You need to think about all those things. So manageability, okay, is it easier to manage or harder? High availability disaster recovery, how are you going to implement that for each one of your consolidation options? Security, I talked about. Performance, is it going to be to render better performance or worse performance? Do you even care? License costs, are you paying by processor? For example, if you have enterprise edition, are you paying by processor? Maybe you want to license by the host processor. Maybe this is why you want to consolidate. Okay, so hardware costs and total costs. Okay, and you have to take into account the team that is supporting the environment. Again, hopefully it's not you and you're not going to be fired. You need to take into consideration the tools that you're using. Like, for example, if you're going to the cloud and your monitoring tools maybe are not good enough for the cloud, or you don't need them anymore, and stuff like that. So the total cost of everything, including the consolidation effort. So let's say that you have a huge environment and you want to move everything to the cloud. That's a big project. Okay, so if let's say that you estimate that this the consolidation itself is going to take you to cost you $1 million, and let's say you have to estimate how many years it will take you to be even with the new cost in the cloud, between the on-prem and the cloud. So a lot of things to think about. let's give you another example. So on-prem versus the cloud. Obviously, I'm going to take the manageability. So obviously on the on-prem, you have the hardware and VM management and everything on top, not below, everything on top. Cloud VM, you still have to manage. You don't manage the hardware anymore. You have to manage the OS instance and database. And obviously with PaaS, you only manage the instance. What about performance? Okay, so performance, for example, it's very, when you have something on-prem, you have control of everything. So you control the storage configuration, the VMs, if you have VMs, you are in control, right? So you can move resources, you can do a lot more for performance. When you have cloud, you only have the flexibility to add resources or move layers and stuff like that. When you have a cloud database, you also limited at a certain point. What I can tell you is that I did a project with another colleague, and we were actually checking on the cloud if, for example, a VM on Azure that is telling you that they're giving you X amount of throughput on the disk, and we compared Oracle OCI, Azure, and Amazon. And apparently, what the vendors are telling you is right. So you're getting the same throughput that they're promising. This is what you're getting, right? You would expect, that on the paper everything looks great, but it's actually true. They actually giving you what they say. So that's a good thing. So a lot of the organizations, I think this is changing slowly. When the cloud started, a lot of the organizations, especially government or accountant, accounting, they were very scared to go to the cloud, okay? Because from security perspective, it looks like I'm putting my data somewhere else, okay? But Microsoft, for example, has invested tons and tons of money to work on the security side. So basically what I can tell you that for most of you, the cloud is more secured than your on-prem, unless you're super security smart. So it's not a big issue anymore, but we have to remember that, for example, there are countries, if you have, for example, China, they have regulations, government regulations, that anything that is hosted in China, the government can go and look at the data. So you need to know all those things so that, for example, if you need your data to stay inside Canada or the US, you need to make sure that you're only using the data centers in those countries. Okay, so it's a big deal in the cloud, but it's very, very secured. Okay, so total cost. So we understand the principle, right? The basics of this. And the same for virtual versus containers. So let's say let's choose one. So they're the same. I think that the total cost for the containers is going to be cheaper because you don't have the operating system in there. From performance, the containers, you have segregation of VM. It's manageable. With containers, they share the host resources, so it could be a better performance. But again, we need to test. On paper, everything looks very, very nice, right? So we need to always test. I'm going to talk about that too. Okay, so too much information. Where do we start? I click on the button. So when I do a consolidation project, I do have some checklists because you need to do a lot of legwork before, right? So you need to, first of all, understand what's your inventory. So instances, applications, databases, and owners. Believe it or not, I'm not sure where you're working, but there are organizations that don't even have their full inventory. And how do I know that? Because I do a lot of pre-sales calls, and I'm asking, how many instances do you have? How many servers? How many applications? Okay, can you check? Nobody knows. So this is the first thing that you need to understand, and to have a contact with, for example, the application or the application development team or the vendor. You need to understand what are you dealing with? What are the dependencies? You need to understand the SLAs of the environment. So when you're consolidating something, depending which consolidation method, you need to understand the SLA. So you cannot consolidate something that has it's only working during the work day, and you don't care what happens at night, with something that is 24/7 business critical, right? You could, right? But you will have to make sure that the SLA is the highest. So you need to understand the SLAs. You need to review the current capacity and performance on the things that you want to consolidate. For example, you don't want to consolidate servers that are already on their knees. You don't want to take two SQL Server instances that are already totally almost dead from performance perspective and consolidate them, right? So you need to understand who is using what, and especially from the SQL Server perspective, because sometimes the machine will be very active, but it's not necessarily the SQL Server. Anybody knows? So let's say that we have a dedicated SQL Server environment. Anybody knows what would be usually the process that it is going to eat up the CPU and memory, and the client doesn't even realize, Give me a guess.
You're talking in the on-prem database, or?
Yeah, on-prem. Let's say that you have a dedicated SQL Server machine. They tell you it's a dedicated, we don't have an application there. What will be usually the thing that will eat up all the CPU and memory, and the client will not even realize?
Backups?
Well, could be, but for my perspective is the antivirus.
Okay.
So a lot of organizations that don't realize that you shouldn't install antivirus on a SQL Server environment, because this is like their default installation, and they forget to put the exclusions. Okay, so when I'm saying look at the current capacity and performance, make sure first that your environment are according to best practices. For example, the power saving option is set to high performance. So when you do capacity and capacity review, you need to make sure that you're actually doing it right? So that everything is properly configured. You don't have processes that are killing the CPU or the memory, except for SQL Server. And this is something very important, because you need to understand exactly what SQL Server needs. Only SQL Server, not everything that is around SQL Server. Okay, that's just my 2 cents on it. Review the isolation requirements and the security. So can we consolidate from security perspective? Does the environment or database or SQL Server instance need to be totally isolated or not? View the dependencies to other databases and instances. This is a biggie. If you are using link servers like crazy, if you're using the 3-part database name, then you need to know about it and think about it. And there are tools that are going to also scan your environment and tell you this. I'm going to talk about that. Assess the current cost. So this is very hard. What are your current costs? They have to be not only the hardware, not only the software, but also, like I said, the human resources, the electricity, everything, right? Because when you're thinking about moving, for example, to the cloud, and you say, oh, I'm only paying X for a SQL Server instance, why would I move to the cloud when it's it's much more? No, because you didn't do your analysis properly. You have to take into consideration everything, the time that the team is spending on configuring hardware or taking care of managing hardware, when you have to scale up or to scale out you know, it's a lot of time. So take everything into consideration. And this is good for us when we go to management and show them, look, this is how much you're going to save when you're going to, let's say, the cloud. Assess the future budget. Now, I'm going to talk about that in one of the next slides. It's also very hard to estimate because you can never know how your database, even though you did performance and capacity review, you will never know how your database is going to perform in another environment until you actually move, okay? So it's just estimates. And how many clients, or even you, will say, oh, we don't know what happened, but we calculated $2,000 per month on this environment, and now we're paying, I don't know, $10,000. It's because it's very hard to estimate first. But again, even after you move, you can still do things to reduce the cost, right? So don't be surprised when you go, for example, to the cloud that you're going to get billed a lot more than what you were expecting. But again, look at the total costs, okay? So don't panic. Discuss the cost with the vendors and representatives. So, for example, if you have a Microsoft, if you are on Azure, if you're thinking about going to Azure, talk to the Microsoft representative. If you're going to Amazon, do the same thing. Maybe you can get, because you have a lot of environments, maybe you can get some you know, like private prices. So this is always good. Assess the feasibility to upgrade environment. So when you consolidate, when you have a consolidation project, it's a very good timing to actually kick somebody's butt, like the development teams, you know, to try and upgrade, especially if you have older versions that are no longer supported, like SQL Server 2008. 2012 is coming too, so we have to be prepared. So everybody really needs to make a big effort, because when it's not under support, you're losing all the security updates, right? And right there, your system is not secured. You know how many clients of ours were hacked and got a ransomware attack? You can't even think about it. You know, so we have to always try to do our best to make sure that we have the latest and greatest. Assess the feasibility of the consolidation option. So from every perspective, everything that we have discussed and more, make sure that this is even feasible. And get a list of the solutions that you're thinking about and make sure that they are feasible. Estimate the cost of the consolidation project, obviously, based on for each option, you will need to know the cost of the consolidation project, and at the end, how much are you going to save and when. So, for example, when I'm doing this type of project, obviously it's just estimates. I say, okay, the consolidation projects cost X. In 5 years, you're going to start saving, for example. So we need to know that. And estimate the cost over time and compare to current. This is exactly what I just said. Okay, so it's some kind of a checklist. You may have more. You may send me comments about things that I missed. Gladly. So what will be the high-level strategy for consolidation? So really, depending on how many environments you want to consolidate, my opinion is create the consolidation strategy and plan. And you may actually have not only one. So let's say that you have many environments. It doesn't mean that you have to move everything to a cloud, to a specific cloud. Could be that you know, this environment, those environments are going to be consolidated to Azure, those environments to Amazon, those environments to something else. Maybe you're going to consolidate instances. So it doesn't mean that you have to consolidate everything everything altogether to one of the methods, right? And you have to assess feasibility of this, obviously. And I recommend doing step-by-step consolidation. It's a very rare case when, for example, you cannot do that. Let's say that you know, I had a client where they had a contract on a data center and they had to move everything to a different data center or to the cloud very quickly, and they were talking about upgrading and they were talking about a lot of things. So usually you can just do step-by-step consolidation. In the case of just moving everything, we call it lift and shift. You want to just move away and then maybe talk about consolidation. But this is crazy. This is crazy. If you do everything, if you have a lot of environments and you need to move everything, it's actually you will panic. You will it will be crazy. And you always have to have some kind of a plan B. Create a list of candidate databases instances by priority for the consolidation. So depending on what you're trying to do, let's say that usually you would say, okay, I would like to try with lower priority to check the feasibility of this, like a group of databases or a group of instances, let's say move them to the cloud and see how it goes, for example. It's always very important to do a proof of concept and testing, because even though you check the feasibility, sometimes there are things that you did not think about. So just to give you an example, we have a client that decided to do their own migration to Amazon, okay, because they wanted to save costs, okay, and now their machines are struggling, performance issues like crazy. So now they took a step back and they're saying, okay, what have we done? Please help us, okay? So please go connect to our servers and check what's going on. But this could have been avoided if you do your due diligence, right? And you do a proof of concept. You make sure that the machine that you've chosen is the right one for you. You should have done performance and capacity review, blah blah blah, everything that I talked about. Okay, but there are always going to be problems, even if you're very planned, but you want to reduce the risk. Oh, this is a big one, and most of us we forget. Do a benchmark, performance benchmark before and after, because especially if you're a consultant and you're doing this migration, because they will always come to you and say, oh, it was better on the other environment. But then when you can show, okay, no, that's not the case, we can compare, okay? Very important. Always create a rollback plan. So the rollback plan could be just a plan B or a real rollback plan. And those are my my tips. Let's talk about some helpful tool. I'm still on time, right? I think yes.
Yes, you're on time.
Okay, yeah, because I like to talk.
Yeah.
So like I said before, I'm sure that you, like every presentation that I have, people come to me after and say, oh, you forgot this tool and this tool and this tool and this method. So, you know, I'm only one person, so everything that I know is what I know. I always like to learn. So if I missed anything that you're using, really let me know. Let's talk about the ones that I know about. So this is a tool that I really like, the map tool, okay, the Microsoft Assessment and Planning tool, where it scans your entire environment for everything and it just gives you numbers, okay? So, but be careful if you have a huge environment, it also scans desktop. You may not want that. So you may want to just ask for SQL Server and SQL Server databases. I have one client that complained that it crashed some of their networks because their networks were not properly configured, but usually we don't have any problems with that. So you want to get the inventory, run the map tool, okay? So it will scan everything. The problem is that it's using WMI, Active Directory, domain services, SMS provider, other technologies to scan your entire network. So I made a test. One of my colleagues created a script, a PowerShell script that goes to the Active Directory, takes all the server names and checks for each one of them with PowerShell if they have SQL Server. And we compared the results to the map tool. And it was so surprising that the map tool found few of the servers that the PowerShell did not, and vice versa. Okay, so I'm not sure. The map tool usually should be able to find everything, but that specific client, they had very complicated environment with multiple domains, with multiple networks, with data centers everywhere in the world. So in that case, we were not able to find everything, but from my some of my other clients, they find everything with the map tool. So what you're getting information about the instances, the databases, and a lot of a lot of valuable information about the instances, like the versions, the additions, the number of processors, the amount of memory. So it's like a tool that helps you with inventory, and you can export the results into Excel. So I think it's by default, it's you have 2 Excels, and you just can analyze the results and see your inventory. I really like this tool. The next one is the DMA, so the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant. So this is it helps you to upgrade, okay? But it also helps you to move to the cloud. But now Microsoft has better tools to move to the cloud. So DMA is like the old style. It's detecting compatibility issues that can impact the database functionality. So when we're talking about feasibility, this is one tool that can help you with the feasibility. It recommends you some improvements on the environments, So it scans your environment. You tell it, I want to move from this to this, or from this version to this version, or from this edition to this edition, and it will give you all the recommendations. It allows you to actually do the migration, so we can say, okay, let's move the schema, or the schema and the data. So it helps you with the migration itself, and here are the sources, and here are the targets, okay? Yeah, and the reason why 2019 is not there, yeah, I don't know if they added 2019 to Azure, I'm not sure. But like I said, Microsoft has different tools. So you can move from the sources to the targets, including Azure Managed Services and to virtual machines and Azure database. So that's a nice tool. We also have the SQL Server Migration Assistant. So the Migration Assistant, I did not talk about moving from another platform to SQL Server, but it basically helps you with that. So let's say that you want to migrate your Oracle database, or your Oracle data, or your MySQL or DB2, okay, or SAP. You want to migrate to SQL Server. It actually helps you automate this. Now, because it's a tool, if you have, let's say you're migrating from Oracle and you have very, very complicated PL SQL, it will not be perfect. You will probably have to rewrite manually most of the code. I've seen the results. So Oracle is full of cursors, right? And SQL Server is not very good with cursors. So the tool will still move the cursors to cursors, but then you have to go and just rewrite the code. So it's not perfect, but if you just need to migrate data, it's good. It's good. It knows how to migrate from the original data types to the SQL Server data types. And you need to download for, let's say you're migrating from Oracle to SQL Server, so you have to download the specific SSMA application for Oracle. Okay, so each one has their own SSMA. A nice tool. Another tool that I really like that helps you analyze the performance and capacity is the PAL. So PAL, what you do is, so if you look at the documentation, you create perfmon counters, you collect the data, you place the data in CSV, and then the PAL is a user interface. You tell it exactly what are the CSV files that you're analyzing, and then it gives you like very nice reports with graphs. You see, it's in each graph it tells you exactly what is the graph about, what are the expected values, and stuff like that. So it's like an HTML. It has like subfolders, so you have to download everything. It's not just one HTML. All the graphs are sitting in a specific folder. But basically, if you're a consultant, for example, or if you want to create like nice reports, you can. It's very hard to read this. Like you really need to analyze this. But if you just want to analyze graphs and average, maximum, minimum, you just go to the folder with the graph and you just look at the picture and you analyze the graphs. So this is for capacity. Microsoft has the Azure Migrate that help you assess and migrate servers from on-premises, okay, to Azure. So it looks at readiness sizing, cost estimate, dependency analysis. And you only need to install this on, for the assessment, you have to install this on a VM, but you don't have to install anything on the assessed environment. So this is just for the assessment phase. But for the migration, you do have to install something. So Microsoft has documentation. They explain step by step what you need to do. You need to download this on each assessed environment, and then you just have to install it, and it will do it for you. Okay. I haven't played a lot with this tool. Okay, but I know that Microsoft is coming up with those tools and better ones. I'm going to talk about them. And for this is only for the database, and for the application you have a different type of tools. And this is a slide that I had to add because Microsoft just came up with the Azure Arc, which is still in preview, so you cannot actually use it for production, but you can play with this. What it does is that it deploys, it allows you to deploy Azure data services on any infrastructure, including on-prem. Okay, so you can choose from the different Azure data services, including Azure Arc enable SQL managed instance. So you can have a managed instance service on-prem. Yeah, you have Postgres, hyperscale, and stuff like that. So this is coming. Just to mention it here. I haven't played with this yet, but I'm very excited to start. Okay, so now you want to calculate. Let's talk about the prices. So when I talked about the total prices, this is just a little piece of the the price calculation. It's a calculation of the machines or the resources that you're going to use in the cloud. So on-prem, obviously, you know what to do because this is what we have been doing for years. You have to go to the vendors and get estimates. But in the cloud, you have those two calculators where you can just enter the machine that you want or the Azure database, the size. So you play with this, the storage that you need, and it gives you the calculation, and you can start adding. So let's say that you need 10 machines. You just add and add and add whatever you want, and the calculator will show you the price per machine and the total price, and you can decide that they have different models, by DPU, by vCPUs, by you can pay by usage, or you can pay so each resource that you're choosing, you have a different model that you can choose from. It can be complicated, but after a few times that you're doing this, you will already understand. My problem with this is that when you have new features, it takes time for the vendors, the cloud vendors, to add them. So you need to research a little bit more, okay? And always read the gotchas, okay? Let's say that you decided this machine is good for you, but then you don't realize that maybe you need to purchase additional storage, okay? Which type of storage? So you need to do a lot of legwork, reading the documentation about what would be the best architecture for me in the cloud. Let's talk a bit about case studies, like I promised. I'm almost done. Okay, so this is a real scenario from a client. I already talked about it a little bit. They had same application, database per client, many small databases. Now, this client, their databases were really small. They had I don't know, a few megabytes to, the largest database was maybe 1 gigabyte, something like that. So, and they had one database for the metadata, and this is how they knew which database, which user belongs to which database, something very complicated, okay? So they came to us because they started with a very little set of clients, and they grew, and they kept growing very much, and I don't know, they came to us when they had 20,000 databases, and they were expecting to have 30,000 databases at the end of that year. So they just wanted us to propose the consolidation method, because the maintenance became so hard for them. Like every time they had a new version, they had to scan all the databases, make sure that there were no issues. So we helped them consolidate everything into not one database, but few databases. They had no performance bottlenecks, and they were thinking, they didn't know if they would go cloud versus on-prem, so they were also thinking about going to the cloud, because imagine when you have the case like this, maybe they could go to and use Elastic Pool on Azure, for example. So we had to do that analysis. So is it better to do like a database consolidation, or just like go to PaaS solution with Elastic Pool? Good question, right? Good question. So we had to create, like a table with benefits and drawbacks. We had to calculate the price, and eventually they decided to actually build a few databases on-prem and use their existing hardware. They're probably going to the cloud later. Instance consolidation, so many instances, one per server, hosting few databases. So each was hosting only few databases, same version.
Can I ask a question regarding your case study?
Yes, which one? The previous one?
Yeah, exactly.
This one? Yeah, sure.
Typically, yeah, when they have such a configuration, right, each of the customer has their own database.
Yes.
Their main concern is the security.
The security.
Somehow the regulation or the policy dictates they cannot share any information or data. And so that's why they put them into the separate database.
Yes, no, okay, so this specific client, no. So we did the analysis, and it was, security was not a problem. But if security is a problem, maybe the Elastic Pool would be better for them, right? For them, it was not, because only the application was able to access the data. They did not have like anything running directly, so they did not actually care about the security. The security regulation, they didn't have PCI, they didn't have like security. I'm just saying, but you're right. If there are security constraints, then you need to find another solution, and this is exactly what we're talking about. Thank you. It's a great question.
Sure. What's actually your solution for this one?
The database consolidation.
Yeah. So you put them into the different schema, or?
That's a very good. Oh, so here's the thing. So they already had the client ID in every table, so it was easy. Sorry, I forgot to say that. So it was very easy to consolidate. So if you are trying to consolidate a lot of smaller databases to different schemas in the same database, don't do it. Okay, it's a pain in the butt. Then you have to manage the schema, really. So you have to call it client X schema, right? And then or just have like the table underscore and the client ID. No, don't do it. This is too much. This is too much. So in that case, it was easy to just consolidate. Everything was the same. They wanted to make sure, so their main concern was the versioning, because they were actually coming up with application version every week. So that was their main concern, and this is why they decided to consolidate into the same database. So first of all, they had the client ID in every table, and then then the version. So that was the idea. So like I said, you have to gather all this information and give the options and decide which one is better for that specific case. So I'm not saying that for another client it will be that, right? Maybe something else.
So you just merge the table?
Yes, just merge every, like you see in the, you just merged, so yeah.
Okay.
And it was easy to do. We had to change some indexes to also include the client ID, but I think they already had that, because they were not sure when they created the application. They were not sure if they're going to have more clients in the same database. So they were ready for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just a case study, like So let's say that you have many instances hosting very few databases each, and it's the same version in addition, or even a different edition. So sometimes, you know, we have clients that they have one enterprise edition and then they have a lot of standard edition, and we're asking them, why are you not just moving everything to the enterprise edition? You have enough resources and you can benefit from online index maintenance and additional enterprise features, right? Table partitioning now, it's also standard, but you know, a lot of things that you can benefit from enterprise, or downgrade your enterprise edition to standard edition and consolidate. Okay. No security constraint or isolation requirements, maintenance and manageability, overhead, license cost, they were paying too much, need to add HA and DR layer, cloud versus on-prem. So in this case, it was very straightforward, just consolidate the databases under fewer instances. Okay. And in this case also, what can be an option? Maybe manage instance. Right? Maybe manage instance, as long as you don't exceed the 100 database and the size of the databases. Okay, so what concerned me about manage, so I did have a client that wanted to go to manage instances. That client, it's another case study. That client, they were creating databases like we change underwear, really, like every day they were creating databases, and for different things, and they were thinking of, and they didn't know, they didn't have security issues, they did not know from performance perspective where to create a database. So they had a lot of SQL Server instances, and they were like just adding databases like randomly. They didn't even know what they're doing. Okay. So what would you recommend? They wanted to go to manage instances, but the manage instances is going to be the same thing because you're going to start, which manage instance are we going to put the database? What's the capacity of the database? It's a new database, you have no idea. So because manage instance has the specific constraints, we did not recommend them to go to manage instances. So we were actually looking at Azure databases, because with Elastic Pool, because you can just create databases and you can gather them into different pools. That's just an example, okay? So I'm not saying that it's easy, but we need to find the best solution. So for the Azure SQL Database Serverless, so the Serverless, if you are using the server a lot, it's going to be costly. So this is really for applications where, for example, you need to run something and then pause, and then the next day run something very heavy and then pause. So up to V cores. Okay. So if you look, this is an example of an application that is idle, and then it runs something, and it utilizes like almost 90% of the CPU, and then again it's idle. So this is more or less a case study that is good for serverless. And this is it for me. I think I'm on time.
Yeah, you're right on time.
I'm right on time. Yeah, that's unusual. So thank you very much. And again, I'm always eager to learn from you guys too. So send me any comment if I missed anything. You know, I'm presenting this in different groups. So any comment, any suggestion is welcome from my side. I hope you find it valuable. Yeah, feel free. So this is my email address, and feel free to send me your comments or questions, whatever.
Yeah, we're getting messages from our. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. First, thank you, Michelle, and it's really very helpful presentation with lots of information. And
thank you.
My question would be regarding the license. Mm-hmm. So can you comment on if I'm building the SQL Server on-prem, mm-hmm. and also leveraging the VM? Mm-hmm. Is there any difference licensing through the VM cores versus the physical cores?
Not as far as I know. It's you're licensing by physical cores. But I'm not, well,
cores?
Yeah, I think it's a physical course, but I may be wrong. This is what I remember. Do you have a Microsoft representative, or you just?
Yeah, we could. Certainly, we could contact.
Yeah, I think it was by physical, but if you want, I can check for you. I don't remember on the top of my head. It's a good question. Okay. Yeah, I think it was by the physical. So this is why you would like to consolidate. I know that some of our clients, you know, that Microsoft changed the licensing, the license model. Yeah. So I think that right now, if you can consolidate VMs with Enterprise Edition, and you will just have to pay for the cores, for the physical cores. But I may be wrong. I don't know. Anybody else knows the answer? Okay, sorry for that.
No problem. No problem. Yeah.
You know why I don't know? Because I don't buy SQL Server. Anything else?
Yeah, if you don't have any questions, so thank you so much, Michelle. It is really great presentation, so much to learn, and you know, when you're being working even in a as a data engineer developer, you may not really look into this because that's not a job, but it's great to know, okay, what do you have the option, you know, when you talk to the other team member, this will really help. Yes. Thank you so much.
And if you want me to present about a specific topic, let me know. I can like anything from the presentation or anything else, I will be happy to present.
Thank you.
One thing. Can you share the slides with us?
Sure.
Oh, of course, yes.
Sure, Michelle, you can send it to me. John, you'll get the email, you know, with the video link and all the resources getting from Michelle.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay. It was a real pleasure. You guys are awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. We're going to end up now, and have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye.